So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this book that is now being broadcast to everyone. It's about Do the Thing, and it's totally dedicated in so many different ways to the heart of what it is that Fit and Faith is. And so it's a gospel-centered goal, gumption, grace for the go-getter girl. And I am excited to just hear where it birthed and what the process and journey and evolution of it was.
Totally. Well, I think the last time you and I talked, my podcast actually was named that, right? It was named Do the Thing. And I really have always had this heart for equipping women with, okay, how do they use what God has given them and their gifts and talents and use that for his glory? And so, you know, a little bit of this backstory, but for all of your listeners who have found their way to you since we've had a conversation, right? About 10 years ago, my mom went through a cancer journey that, praise God, we're about a decade on the other side of, and she's a cancer survivor now. But for 5 or 6 years, God led me to start and lead a ministry where we donated handmade hats and handwritten letters of encouragement to cancer treatment centers all over America. We did work with St. Jude and MD Anderson and just some incredible organizations. And as it happens, as you lead something, I had opportunity to speak in front of women's groups and churches and would share what God was doing as a result of what my mom had been through. And Tamra, you'll relate to this. The most fun parts of speaking to me are the conversations that actually happen after you step off a stage,
100%.
right? And so 100%. I would have these conversations with women after I'd get done speaking of, you know, I love what God did through your mom's story. And in a sense, I feel my heart stirred towards something. I feel God equipping me in some way to go do something similar but different. And almost every single time I would notice them sort of hush to a whisper, or I would sense, you know, maybe that fear or doubt on their face, and something would be holding them back.
For sure.
Right? From moving forward into all God had and how he wanted to use their gifts and talents for his glory. And so I had enough of those conversations that left me in a place of like, not on my watch. You know, like I just want to see God's daughters like rise up and use what he has given them to build his kingdom, advance the gospel, use everything that we have for his glory this side of heaven. And so as I explored, okay, what does it look like for me to write a book? And I feel called to this work, and what would be that kind of first message I'd want to share with the world? And it felt like a natural place to start, right? Of let's equip women with, not necessarily the answer to fear or doubt or whatever. We're all going to experience those things, but what's our foundation when we do, and where are we turning when we do? And so that's probably kind of the bird's eye view of kind of where me and God have been leading up to the book.
So from the time frame of the podcast launching, and then I know you went into like a book lover's journey, like you're like the best place to go for go-to book resources and like just learning your lens through all of these different authors.
Yeah.
There's like this amazing culture that's bred in the author journey, because without the process connected to the book, we wouldn't have as much connectivity, because everybody's messages, they might overlap when we're in the kingdom and there's from the faith lens. There's a lot that happens from a healing perspective when you're actually writing the book. So,
oh my goodness,
what was that journey like for you?
Yes. You know, me and my husband recently recorded an episode for the podcast that I'm so excited about. And I took questions from my launch team. And one of the questions was, how have you had to live out the message of this book as you've written, right? That's commonly something authors will talk about, right?
Yep.
Because often God will lead us to maybe this thing that we're passionate about writing. And more often than not, I hear authors talk about how hard it is to actually live that out. And often God provides us the opportunity to do that as we write about it. And I paused and I thought, I could go through every individual chapter of that book and give you an example of, okay, here's how the Lord met me in that, and here's how I had to live that out. I think one of the most profound ones, because this is a conversation with you.
Yeah.
And the last time we talked, I was still leading that ministry that I described.
Yeah.
And there's actually a chapter in the book about quitting. because I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. I think God calls us many times into something that we feel super passionate about and we think it's going to last forever. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And in this particular case in my own life, God led me elsewhere. And there was, in the beginning, a lot of guilt and shame in that, right? Because the thing God had called me to do was so personally tied to what my mom, my best friend, had been through.
Yeah.
And so I tell the story of the day that I sat on her couch, and I remember her looking at me and saying, I'm just sensing God leading you into a new season. I'd gotten married, and as you know, my husband's a pastor. And so I joined him in, serving in our local church, and really felt called to start a podcast and continue in that work and pursue writing. And she looked at me and said, Rebecca, I saw you be faithful to what God had for that season. And you don't need my permission to move on and to be faithful again in what God's calling you into next. But if it's helpful to hear me say, like, it's okay, I will say that for you. And so that's an area that I personally love talking about, because there is no shame. There is no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. We know that. We know that truth from the book of Romans. And yet in these impasses in our calling, many times we do feel that. And I just don't think, I know that that's not from the Lord, that's from the enemy. And so that's probably one of the more personal places of healing and heart work that God did in me pretty close to the time that I wrote the book. And I think that matters. So that's coming to mind as you ask that question.
No, I'm so glad that you did. It's actually like really divinely aligned to things that are happening within the inner workings of our business and the evolution of that business. And a part of that being that, in order to step into something new, you generally have to let go of something old.
Yes.
And that shedding, that evolution is another beautiful way of looking at it, right? It's not to say that part is it's like dead. No, it might not be active, but it was a pruning season. And in that season that the fruit was alive and you stewarded it really, really well from the root. So your same root is there. Your same like fruit is going to be coming, but it's going to look on different branch. It's a new branch that was essentially evolved out of said tree and foundation.